Shannon, I want to ask you an unfair question. Okay, so now this is part of kind of two shows in one, the conversation and the revolution. So they're in the revolution, we try to fix things. You show what's wrong with the government. So your piece brilliantly shows what's wrong with the government here. And it's a massively important issue. We could be taking drugs that are harmful to us because of this corruption. And certainly all of our prices are higher, et cetera. Now you've also written for New York Times Sunday Magazine, Time, The Atlantic, Slate, The Sunday Times of London, Washington Post, et cetera, right? So what I'm gonna ask you is, on the revolution, we try to change things. And I feel like one of the main stumbling blocks to change is mainstream media. That mainstream media sees pieces like yours that are brilliant and great and inarguable, right? And they see the overwhelming corruption, and maybe they cover it from time to time, sparingly, but they have instant and collective amnesia over it. And the next time we're talking about a bill or we're talking about the issue overall, nobody ever says, oh, by the way, dear readers, this entire industry is corrupt and our entire government is corrupt, and this is how they corrupted it, so don't believe what they're saying. They don't. They seem to just go back to, no, but the government is right and don't question it, et cetera. So it's an unfair question because you don't represent mainstream media. But since you worked in media enough in all these places, what's your sense of why they do that? All right, welcome to the revolution. We are doing some interviews now to give you a sense of why we need a revolution. And that is to get our representative democracy and our government back. So now we're gonna bring on Shannon Brownlee. She wrote a great piece in The Lever about the FDA and the corruption that goes on there and the corporate capture that happens. Shannon, wonderful to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, you have to pronounce your name for me.
Cenk Uygur.
Cenk, okay.
Yeah, like short for Jenkins, Cenk. So Shannon, let's talk about the FDA and how corporate capture works. So first of all, what's Big Pharma and how much money did they spend on lobbying the government over the last 3 decades?
They spent multiple billions of dollars lobbying the federal government over the last 3 decades. And Big Pharma is really not just companies that make drugs, but also make biotech drugs, which are a little bit different, but we call all of them Big Pharma.
So now the Food and Drug Administration in the past has been really trusted and in a lot of ways a gold standard in the world for approving drugs and making sure that things are safe, right? But it seems like things are changing a little bit, and you wrote about that. Why are they changing? Why are we concerned about what's happening at the FDA?
Well, it's actually been going on for many decades. It's not just with this new administration. It's been a problem for 25 or 30 years that the pharmaceutical industry has effectively not only captured the FDA in various ways, but it's also captured all of the other entities around the FDA that influence the decisions that it makes, including patient groups, including Congress, including physicians, including researchers.
Yeah, so I didn't mean to imply that it's just under this administration, absolutely not. In fact, a lot of their voters, not their politicians, but their voters, the MAHA crowd, Make America Healthy Again, there's a host of issues there. But on the upside of MAHA is they are concerned about these giant corporations that are having an undue influence in our government, and they're right to be concerned, and your article shows that and proves it. So before we get to what this administration is doing, tell us about the law that was passed, I believe in 1992, that wound up doing so much damage.
You bet. Although I have to tell you that the sort of MAHA situation, it makes it very confusing to be a lefty or a conservative because in a lot of ways, MAHA is saying a lot of things that that my colleague Jeanne Lenzer, who is my co-author on this article, and I have been saying for many, many years. And so it's been very interesting. But 1992 is the important year. This was the passage of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, known in Washington, D.C. as PDUFA. And it was passed For a number of reasons. One of them being that the FDA just didn't have the money to be able to review drugs in a timely way. So drugs would sit on a reviewer's desk for as long as 2 years before they were able to get to it, because the administration, the Reagan administration, and the Congress were effectively starving the FDA of funding.
So they've got a problem. It's taking too long to approve drugs. Fair. They decide that they're going to do a bill to expedite it. Well, what did they do wrong in that bill?
So what the bill did is it created this program called user fees, and the pharmaceutical industry effectively, it became pay to play. The pharmaceutical industry paid the FDA and still pays the FDA to review drugs quickly. So one of the things that the FDA had to agree to was that it would get drugs reviewed and a decision made within 1 year. And in fact, after the user fees were put into effect, the agency was able to do it. They were able to do it in 14 months, pretty quickly. And the time that they've taken has gone down and down and down because these user fees paid for more reviewers, and that really sped things up.
Okay, so that's the good news. Okay, now we're approving drugs a little bit quicker, and so it seems like it worked. But now, unfortunately, we go to the law of unintended consequences. So once they're getting user fees from the people and the companies they're supposed to be regulating, now wait a minute, if they say that their drug doesn't work, and that either that company gets aggrieved, or by the way, maybe the company goes under and then they can't pay a fee, right? Because their drug doesn't work, right? So now you've hired 1,000 people using these user fees, but since you have less of them now, you might have to fire 200 of them or 20 of them. So wait a minute, now your job kind of depends on you approving these drugs. Have I summarized it right?
That is exactly the problem, which is that when an agency is dependent on the industry for its funding, it effectively has a vested interest in doing what the agency is going to be happy with. And what the companies would do if their drug wasn't approved is they would go complain to Congress. And as we know, Congress is in the pocket of these industries, of many industries, but no industry is more able to pull shots than the pharmaceutical industry, in large measure because it gives more money to Congress than any other single industry in the United States.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about is Israel's lobbying in the middle of this horrible genocide for these last 2 years. But as I've clarified on the show dozens of times, Big Pharma is much larger than AIPAC.
Way bigger.
Yeah, and so and they're so powerful, they don't allow us to negotiate the prices of their product, which is stunning. It's literally unprecedented, unheard of in any government. It's just, it's bizarre. So now, but Shannon, let me break it down a little bit more. So they do political capture because they spent $3.6 billion lobbying in the last 3 decades, right? And they didn't spend the $3.6 billion for their health or for charity. They did it to do political capture, buy off all the politicians. Now you're talking about regulatory capture, where now all of a sudden their jobs depend on them approving the drugs inside the government. But then there's another problem for the folks that work at the FDA, and that's the revolving door. So tell us what the revolving door is.
So the revolving door is that, and interestingly, it spins both ways. The revolving door means that that people at the FDA, when they leave the FDA, they often go to jobs in the pharmaceutical industry. And while on the one hand, you say, well, that's kind of the stuff that they're really good at is thinking about drugs and what drugs work and what drugs don't work and how you get drugs across the finish line at the FDA. But what it does is it creates a situation where when you're in your job at the FDA, you're making your decisions about whether or not this drug should be approved or not. You may be thinking, well, in a year or two, I'm going to be going out there looking for a new job because I'm not making as much money when I work for government. This is particularly a problem for the higher ups, for managers who often go to pharmaceutical jobs. But the way the revolving door spins the other direction is that people from industry cycle into the FDA, they implement industry-friendly policies while they're there, and then they cycle right back out again, and they go take their jobs again at the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, so now this also happens in other industries, most notably defense contractors. So generals give billions of dollars to defense contractors when they're in the Pentagon, then they retire, and voila, they get jobs that are worth millions of dollars from those same defense contractors. So in fact, I actually asked Elon Musk when he was doing Doge, hey, can you pass a law that says that they will not be able to work for defense contractors? Both him and Donald Trump Jr. said, yes, we're working on that. You know what's funny is that a year later, it turns out they weren't working on it.
I know, I'll believe it when I see it, exactly.
Right, So now, same thing in the case of healthcare. As you pointed out earlier, a lot of Maha is actually on the right side on this issue. They're against this kind of corruption. They might call it the swamp, right? And so has RFK Jr. or Donald Trump helped in this regard or hurt?
I don't know. It's sort of like on the one hand, on the other hand. So to start with, the commissioner that was appointed, Marty Makary, is a physician. He's a surgeon. He actually, I've co-authored with him on a paper in a medical journal. He actually was going to be a co-author on one of the stories in this series because he was really committed to the use of good science in approving drugs. But I think he's stymied by an administration that's very deregulatory and that is very susceptible to the kinds of lobbying that Congress is susceptible to, which is that when a company doesn't like what the FDA has done, it goes to Congress, and now it also goes to the White House. And we just saw this in the case of the approval of a drug that is for a rare condition called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And a bunch of congressmen went to the White House when the current one of the current people at the FDA said he was going to halt sales. Some people, including the company, went to the White House, and next thing you know, this guy gets fired. So it's on the one hand, there are people who have good intentions in the FDA. On the other hand, they are really being stymied by an administration that's not really that interested in going up against the pharmaceutical industry. At least that's our take on it.
Yeah, but backed up by facts, right? And I remember,
yes.
I remember when RFK Jr. came in. And by the way, when he was an independent candidate, we interviewed him here. We're open-minded, and I liked his housing price policy. I liked his anti-corruption policy, and some of his healthcare policies. And others, obviously, I massively disagree with, and that's normal. That's okay. But so he said he was going to take these guys on. You know, Shannon, as far as I've seen, he hasn't. He went from taking on the pharmaceutical companies and the big food and all those things that he said he was going to campaign against. And now we're doing weirdo stuff on autism and vaccines and like distractions and culture war stuff. And it doesn't look like he's addressed any of the corporate problems.
You're absolutely right. And I don't know whether it's because he can't or because that was just a cover. Because the reality is much of this, so the Maha stuff is one thing, and then a lot of the president's agenda have come out of the Heritage Foundation and their Project 2025 document. And the Heritage Foundation has always been very, very pro-industry. It's very right-wing. It has it's very conservative, and yet a lot of what was in Project 2025 was. I mean, I could have written parts of it, and a lot of what was in the Maha document, I could have written parts of it. But I think it's kind of a bait and switch, that they say things that will appeal to the base, and then they don't really have any intention of actually following through on it. And so people vote for them and think they're doing the right thing when in fact they're really not doing the right thing. The whole thing about autism and vaccines is RFK's pet thing. and there's not a lot of evidence behind a lot of it. And I wish that I wish that he would do something about big food. That's another issue. That's another big contributor to the ill health in the United States. And I wish he would do something about the pharmaceutical industry, but I don't know whether he can't or he doesn't really mean it. It's hard to know.
So now back to the FDA. Approving drugs because there's pressure to approve them, but not necessarily based on the science, could be very dangerous. So yes. Tell us about the potential dangers here.
So there's no such thing as free lunch in healthcare, and there's no such thing as a side effect free medicine. All drugs have side effects. And so in the approval process, what the reviewers are really trying to do is kind of strike a balance between what the harms are, what the potential for harm is, versus the potential for benefit. And if you have a drug that doesn't really offer any benefit, all it can do is harm patients. And that is exactly what's happening right now, is that there are these drugs that are being put on the market that either we don't know yet whether or not they actually are effective, or it's pretty clear that they're not effective. And yet the harms stay exactly the same. And so these drugs are going out there and people are buying them, and they're paying out of pocket, their insurers are paying for them, which means we all pay for it. And they're harming patients.
So you mentioned a couple of Alzheimer's drugs in the beginning of the piece. Tell us a little bit about that particular example.
So we dove pretty deep into the Alzheimer's drugs. The first one that was approved was Aduhelm, and this was a drug that failed on the first go round at the FDA. The FDA said no because it didn't show any benefit to patients. It's not even, it's really important to understand that these drugs don't actually improve your dementia. What they are supposed to do is actually slow it down, and they are not doing even that. And they have very serious harms. They cause strokes. They cause they've killed people. These are really, really serious drugs. And if they're not helping anybody, if they're not slowing dementia down, then there's really no point to taking them. So the first one gets approved after it fails, and it gets approved on this preliminary evidence. And it's approved in part because there was one guy at the FDA who decided that he really wanted it to get approved. His name was Billy Dunn. And it was very, very clear that all the meetings that the company had with this guy, all the arm twisting that went on was crucial to how it got approved. So then the other two drugs come. So then there's this big brouhaha in the press, and this drug ultimately gets withdrawn from the market by the company. So then the other two drugs get approved, and they're really no better. They're basically the same kind of drug. They have the same kinds of side effects, and they have the same almost non-existent, if not non-existent, efficacy.
Yeah, huge problem. By the way,
and here's the thing that sort of Alzheimer's is a really terrible problem. It's a big problem, and we don't have effective treatments for it. So there's a huge need. My parents all had dementia at some point in their lives. It wasn't that bad, but it was significant. And so we really need treatments, but approving drugs just because we really need treatments is not the same as approving drugs that actually benefit patients.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, you said Billy Dunn there, and it reminded me of Obama's ad on Billy Tauzin in that case, who was a congressman from Louisiana, who was a Democrat, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so for folks,
he went to his just reward when he left Congress after making the pharmaceutical deal for Medicare by going to the pharmaceutical industry lobbying group.
Yeah, exactly. And so, because I wanted to be fair, we mentioned how Trump and RFK Jr. basically lied to their voters and they're just supporting the industry. Obama made an ad called Billy, where he called out Billy Tauzin, who came up with this crooked, you can't negotiate drug prices plan, right? And then Obama promised that he was going to end it. He had 8 years, didn't end it, didn't try to end it, didn't do anything about it, okay?
Nope.
So another bait and switch, that time on Democratic voters. And Shannon's right, then Billy Tozen went on to make millions of dollars from those same drug companies. So the corruption is so thick here, you could cut it with a knife. So now there's one other aspect that is not related to the government that's also a little bit scary, and it's physician capture. So I knew a little bit about this before, learned more about it in your piece. So I know they do junkets, and I know they help to push Oxy, for example, et cetera. But tell us a little bit more about how the drug companies do physician capture.
So physicians have been captured in very, very interestingly subtle and clever ways. And you talk about junkets. For a long time, doctors would go on these trips to really nice places like Hawaii and the Caribbean to go to meetings, and all their expenses would be paid. If a physician seemed like they had some sway with their colleagues, they would be invited to become a speaker. The companies called these physicians, in particular, key opinion leaders, KOLs, and they would wine them and dine them and woo them and tell them how great they were and how smart they were and how influential and how important. And then they'd supply them with slides and give them their lecture notes, and they would go out. These doctors would effectively become covert marketers for drugs. And that still goes on, certainly. But the other way that physicians have been co-opted is because the research has been co-opted. So the drug industry pays for the majority of clinical research, and what that is research that involves patients. So there's animal research, there's bench research, doesn't involve any animals at all, and then there's human research, which is called clinical research. And the drug industry pays for the vast majority of it. And they're interested in studies that basically show whether or not their drugs work, and they really want the studies to show that their drugs do work. So they often design the studies, and they have quite a bit of control over how the studies are written up, how they're interpreted. And physicians don't necessarily know this. They don't have time to read the journals really carefully, and so they've effectively been kind of lulled into believing that an FDA approval means something. They often think this, and that the drug companies are basically telling them how to prescribe these drugs and to whom they should prescribe the drugs. And they've effectively been co-opted that way.
Yeah, that's really scary. One, I want to be able to.
Yeah, it should be scary.
Yeah, that's even more scary, honestly, than government capture, because A, you got to be able to trust your doctor, and B, that concept blows up on us during COVID, because then people start going, well, nah, I don't believe the doctors. Yes. Now we're in a lot of trouble when people don't believe the doctors, right?
You're right, and COVID really exposed an awful lot of the fault lines in medicine in so many ways.
Okay, so now Shannon wrote this piece with Jeanne Lenzer. It's called "Science for Sale: How Drug Makers Captured the FDA." You gotta read it. We have the link in the description box wherever we put up this video, so please check it out. But now, Shannon, I want to ask you an unfair question. Okay, so now this is part of kind of two shows in one, the conversation and the revolution. So they're in the revolution, we try to fix things. You show what's wrong with the government. So your piece brilliantly shows what's wrong with the government here. And it's a massively important issue. We could be taking drugs that are harmful to us because of this corruption, and certainly all of our prices are higher, et cetera. Now you've also written for New York Times Sunday Magazine, Time, The Atlantic, Slate, The Sunday Times of London, Washington Post, et cetera, right? So what I'm gonna ask you is, on the revolution, we try to change things, and I feel like one of the main stumbling blocks to change is mainstream media. That mainstream media sees pieces like yours that are brilliant and great and inarguable, right? And they see the overwhelming corruption, and maybe they cover it from time to time, sparingly, but they have instant and collective amnesia over it. And the next time we're talking about a bill or we're talking about the issue overall, nobody ever says, oh, by the way, dear readers, this entire industry is corrupt and our entire government is corrupt, and this is how they corrupted it, so don't believe what they're saying. They don't. They seem to just go back to no, but the government is right and don't question it, etc. So it's an unfair question because you don't represent mainstream media. But since you worked in media enough in all these places, what's your sense of why they do that?
Oh gosh. I've been freelancing for a really long time. I haven't been on staff anywhere for not since the 1990s. And so I have to say that I think a lot of it has to do with people not being woken up to what's going on. I mean, I think journalists are trying their best. I think editors are trying their best. I remember when I first started writing about the antidepressants, and I would pitch a story to an editor, and the editor just wouldn't believe what I was saying because I was saying, look, these drugs aren't very effective. And part of the reason for that was that a lot of them were on the drugs. I mean, it was, it was hard to persuade people of these very contrarian positions. And so in some ways the mainstream media is really quite conservative in the sense that it doesn't step out on the end of the diving board too much. It doesn't really go against the prevailing wisdom very much. And we saw this with COVID, where there were lots of reasons to question the COVID vaccines. There were lots of reasons to question the decisions about lockdowns. And mainstream media took this position that said, Tony Fauci is right about everything, and the vaccines are good, and the drug, what's the drug that now is around? I don't even remember the name of it, which doesn't work, by the way. You should be taking that drug, and lockdowns are good for, they're going to be what saves everybody. And there were lots of reasons to question that. And it was very, very hard to get the mainstream media to pay attention to the sort of contrarian views. And then once it became politicized, it was even harder. It was like Fox had one position and ABC News had another position.
Yeah, I think it's fair to call that media capture, right?
Well,
so
yeah, except I'm not sure who captured the media. I mean, on the one hand, pharmaceutical companies are big advertisers for parts of the media, but in terms of, I don't know how it happened, frankly. I can't tell you.
Look, I think it's zeitgeist capture, it's groupthink,
yes.
but the groupthink comes from somewhere. And so on cable news, they have two primary sources of revenue. Politicians, the political ads that run in every cycle. That's why they're so nice to the politicians, because they're their top customer. And the second is drug companies. So those are the two things that are invaluable. On cable news, you're never gonna question those, and I have personal experience. I was criticizing one of the sponsors at MSNBC when I was an anchor on MSNBC, and they told me not to do that. So that's how this game is played. And they hire people that think like them. So if they think, oh yeah, no, corporations are great, the government is great, you shouldn't challenge them, they'll hire more and more people like that until almost all the media is captured by those corporate interests. So last thing here, so how could the government fix this, right? So we've got the government capture we talked a lot about. I know, these are very hard questions.
I'm laughing. The government can't fix it until we fix campaign finance, really. I mean, Congress is not gonna bite the hand that feeds it. And if Pharma is the biggest hand, there is no way they are gonna bite that particular hand. So in order to fix the FDA, and this sounds like boil the ocean, because campaign finance has been around. It's sort of the solution to, it's not the solution, but it's an important component to many, many kinds of change that need to happen. We once had good campaign finance laws, and they were eroded over the last 50 years, 40 years. When was Nixon? Anyway, 50, they've been eroded over the years, and now they don't have any teeth, almost no teeth whatsoever. And so that is kind of the beginning of being able to reform the FDA. And but in the meantime, there are a number of small things that can happen. One thing we didn't talk about was the role that patient advocacy groups play. They are incredibly important to decisions at the FDA. They have a lot of power and they have a lot of sway, both with the media and with Congress, because they seem to be unimpeachable sources. They're patients, after all. And they've been completely captured by the industry. So one of the things that can happen is that we can have rules about disclosure about where their money comes from. They do not disclose that they get a huge amount of their money from the pharmaceutical industry. So that's one thing that could happen. That might pass Congress, and it would help a little.
Yep. So the patient advocacy groups are kind of like the think tanks. And Lewis Powell wrote about this back in 1971, and then they implemented this plan, right? Which was, yeah, we'll just get them to.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, we'll just get them to believe that our experts are the real experts, and we'll just make them say that the corporations are right about everything. And that's literally what happened, right in front of our eyes.
Oh yeah, and I used to be at a think tank, and it was we tried to be nonpartisan. It was the New America Foundation, and it was a very interesting place because we had conservatives and liberals there, and it was a very exciting place because of that. It wasn't just like we're the party line.
Yeah, no, but you know what, Shannon? I'll end on a optimistic, hopeful note, because I now see something that I've never seen before, and I think that might be the answer. So look at this conversation we had where we criticized both Republicans and Democrats, politicians, and we gave credit to both Democratic and Republican voters, right? And so the Republican voters want to drain the swamp. The Democratic voters want to end the corruption of money in politics. So we basically agree. We just need, and now online media is breaking the monopoly of mainstream media. And mainstream media is the one that told us, trust the politicians, trust the think tanks, trust all these folks. And now that they've lost credibility, I believe that a revolution can actually begin. And I don't mean it, of course, in any physical or violent way. I mean it in a political way, right? And I think that both sides voters are waking up and realizing we've been had, we've been took, and we got to get our government back. And I think we can unite to do campaign finance reform. And if we do, voila.
That would be the revolution. That would be the beginning of the revolution. That would be pretty amazing.
All right, I'm gonna work on it.
From your mouth to God's ears, as the saying goes.
More importantly, from my mouth to the American voters' ears. So we can rise up together.
Yes.
Or from all of our mouths, of course. Now, guys, Shannon's piece is brilliant. You got to check it out. It's called Science for Sale, How Drug Makers Captured the FDA. It's at the Lever, but we'll put the link down below in the description box. So go check it out. Shannon, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.